Spike Jonze and Charlie Kaufman's film Being John Malkovich is a wonderful film full of fresh, original images, very non-cliched images. And the film's controlling central metaphor is the idea of the puppet. And the puppet is a sort of survival or a link back to the Italian puppetry and the Commedia dell'arte and that whole wonderful world of carnival culture that Mikhail Bakhtin wrote about in his book on Rabelais, in which he talks about how the central image of the body in carnival culture is this idea that the body is essentially incomplete. It's open. Whereas the classical idea of the body, the mainstream idea of the body, is something closed, something finished and completed. And this idea of the body as something that is an open system is this idea that it's constantly spawning and budding and giving rise to new forms. And so in carnival culture, the body is linked with the earth and with the body and the lower bodily stratum of the genitals and defecation and eating and all these things that have to do with the body as a process, as a metabolic process that is moving through time and spawning and generating new forms. And in this film, Malkovich himself will become a sort of laboratory within which these characters will perform an experiment of consciousness. And the film works on a number of levels simultaneously. You have a level that deals sort of with reincarnation, but you also have the level that deals with the cult and culture of the celebrity and the effects that moving through electronic culture has on the psyche, the splintering effects that it has. Here we see as Craig, the puppeteer, he hasn't been able to find work as a puppeteer, so he goes to work in this office building, Lester Corp. And here it's the 7.5 floor, and the ceiling is lower, and it makes everybody look like a giant. And it kind of retrieves the Alice in Wonderland, the opening image in Alice in Wonderland, where Alice, after she has taken the pill, grows up to a giant size, and she is completely spatially disproportionate with the surrounding spaces around her, because in electric culture, what electric culture does is it retrieves the early spatial configuration of the pre-perspectival, pre-Renaissance feeling for space, in which space is a kind of haptic, tactile function. The sense of touch is discontinuous. And in that spatial world, and that spatial world, by the way, is also the same spatial world as tribal man, in which magical objects are created, staffs and batons and carved objects, and each object occupies its own space separately and independently from each other object. So Alice in Wonderland, with this spatial disproportionality, retrieves this early pre-Renaissance, pre-perspectival, archaic idea of each object existing in its own space, carving out its own space. And electronic culture generally goes back and retrieves this. Now here we have the image of Craig discovers this portal in his office, and the portal is a portal that leads into the mind of the actor John Malkovich. And at first here, the image once again links back to Alice in Wonderland. And then as he goes into the portal, he goes through a tunnel, a rather vaginal opening, as though we were going back into the tribal world. And here, the modern tribal world is a world composed of celebrities who have become totems that generate their own tribes. Here, the film plays around with the idea that as people can become Malkovich and look out through his eyes, the film plays around with the idea that celebrities are really masks that the public puts on in order to experience a fantasy world, a sort of capitalistic, fantasial, phantasmatic world of leisure and play and wealth and opulence and money. And it's a world that's totally at odds with the banal, drab, 9-to-5 grind of the office world. And it's a world that is tabloid culture, in which the celebrity becomes the central fetish or tribal totem, and the tabloid becomes essentially the gospel that is partaken of by all the worshipers and adherents. And here he comes out of Malkovich because you can only spend 15 minutes inside of Malkovich for some bizarre reason that is unexplained. And the film leaves a lot of things unexplained, like, for example, why John Malkovich specifically. And that leaving these things unexplained is part of the success of the film, because it leaves room for ambiguity and for the viewer's own interpretations. Now here, Craig's wife Lottie goes in through the portal to become Malkovich, and she has the contrasexual experience of being a man, and it completely destabilizes her psyche. And so all these people are trying to experience the life of the celebrity, and each one is projecting their own world into the celebrity, and the celebrity acts as a kind of mirror. the celebrity puts on the public as a mask, just as the public puts on the celebrity as a mask. And there's a kind of mutual puppet play at work between the celebrity and the public. In many ways, the celebrity in our culture is a puppet, and the public is the puppeteer operating him. And here Lottie has discovered that there is a sort of Malkovich cult operating. The owner of Leicester Corps has been tracking Malkovich's life and career for many years because he's planning an exodus to transmigrate inside of Malkovich's body so that he will become immortal. Now here, this is an interesting scene because Malkovich has gone through the portal himself, and he is experiencing the human equivalent of taking a video camera and turning it back at its own monitor so that you see an image within an image within an image repeated to infinity. And essentially the film is making the statement that the celebrity who descends into electronic culture and has his image multiplied 1,000-fold is essentially an equivalent of resonance, of electronic feedback. And that human feedback effect can be very confusing to the celebrity. It can disorient the psyche and cause all kinds of problems. The famous sort of archetypal death scenario of the Elvis Presley or the Marilyn Monroe or the James Dean is all a function of the confusion and destabilization of the psyche that results from accelerating the self to light speed and producing 1,000-fold images of oneself at the speed of light. Now here Craig has finally achieved complete control of the Malkovich puppet, as it were, and so we have this wonderful play of the soul is in relation to the body as the puppeteer is in relation to the puppet. And this little Malkovich cult of elderly people is all planning to transmigrate into Malkovich on his 44th birthday at midnight. But Craig, meanwhile, is living his life as a puppeteer, riding vicariously on Malkovich's fame. He uses Malkovich as a vehicle for his fame. Then they get Craig to leave, and then everyone begins this exodus, this sort of transmigration inside of Malkovich, where they all become sort of autonomous complexes, as it were, to use a Jungian phrase, inside the subconscious of Malkovich. And this is the end of the film where Malkovich reveals to Charlie Sheen that there's another vessel, Emily, his daughter, that will become the next vessel for transmigration. But we find out at the end that Craig's already in there.